The Repercussions of Resurrection. Chapter 1. The Accident. Dr. Jonathan Albright was a brilliant geneticist, celebrated in his field for groundbreaking work in cloning and gene therapy. His wife, Emily, and their two children, Sarah and Michael, were the center of his world. They were his motivation, his support, and his reason for pushing the boundaries of science. Tragedy struck on a crisp autumn evening. Emily and the children were on their way to visit Jonathan at a conference in New York when their plane crashed. The news shattered Jonathan's life. The grief was unbearable, and the emptiness left in their absence consumed him. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think. The world felt like a cruel joke, a hollow echo of what once was. Days turned into weeks, and Jonathan's colleagues grew worried. He stopped going to the lab, stopped answering calls, stopped living. But amidst the darkness, a dangerous idea began to take root in his mind, a notion that defied nature, ethics, and reason. Chapter 2. The Plan. Jonathan locked himself in his home laboratory, surrounded by photos of his family. Desperation drove him to the unthinkable. What if he could bring them back? What if science could correct fate's cruel twist? He began to pore over his research, every note, every experiment he'd ever conducted. The concept of cloning humans had always been theoretical, fraught with ethical dilemmas and technical challenges. But Jonathan was a man with nothing to lose. He obtained DNA samples from their belongings: a hairbrush, a toothbrush, a favorite sweater. He meticulously extracted the genetic material and set to work. The process was slow, agonizingly detailed, and fraught with failures. Weeks turned into months, but Jonathan's resolve never wavered. He barely ate, barely slept, consumed by his quest. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he succeeded. Embryos began to form, perfect replicas of his lost family. Jonathan's heart raced with a mix of fear and excitement. He transferred the embryos to a surrogate, watching over her with obsessive care. Each day, he marveled at the life growing within her, his hope rekindling with every heartbeat. Chapter 3. Rebirth. 9 months later, the surrogate went into labor. Jonathan was there every step of the way, his heart pounding with anticipation. When the first cry filled the room, tears streamed down his face. Sarah was born first, followed by Michael and then Emily. They were perfect, identical in every way to the family he had lost. Jonathan took them home, his house once again filled with laughter and love. The children grew quickly, their personalities mirroring those of their originals. Sarah was curious and adventurous, Michael was thoughtful and quiet, and Emily was the nurturing, loving mother he remembered. But as time passed, Jonathan began to notice subtle differences. Sarah's laughter sometimes took on an eerie tone, Michael's quietness seemed more brooding, and Emily's nurturing felt more possessive. Small things easily dismissed, but they gnawed at the back of his mind. Chapter 4. Unease. Jonathan threw himself into rebuilding their lives, trying to ignore the growing unease. But the signs became harder to dismiss. Sarah began to draw disturbing pictures, images of their plane crash, of fire and twisted metal. Michael started speaking in a cold, detached manner, often staring at Jonathan with an unsettling intensity. Emily, once gentle and loving, became overbearing, her affection suffocating. One night, Jonathan woke to find Sarah standing by his bed, her eyes wide and unblinking. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice devoid of emotion. "Why did you bring us back?" A chill ran down his spine. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" She tilted her head, her gaze piercing. "We remember the crash. We remember dying." Jonathan's heart pounded in his chest. "You're just having bad dreams, Sarah. Everything's fine." But it wasn't fine. The house began to feel oppressive, the air thick with a sense of dread. Jonathan's dreams were haunted by visions of his family, their faces twisted in pain and anger. He tried to rationalize it, to convince himself that it was just the stress of their extraordinary situation. But deep down, he knew something was terribly wrong. Chapter 5. The Revelation. Jonathan decided to delve deeper into the cloning process, hoping to find an explanation for the changes in his family. He combed through his research, looking for any anomaly, any mistake. It was then he discovered a hidden file in his old notes, a warning from a colleague who had dabbled in similar experiments. The note spoke of residual memories, fragments of consciousness that could carry over from their original to the clone. A cold sweat broke out on Jonathan's forehead. Had he unknowingly transferred the traumatic memories of their deaths? Was that why his cloned family seemed haunted? Desperation drove him to confront Emily. "Do you remember anything from before?" he asked, his voice trembling. Emily's eyes darkened. "We remember everything, Jonathan. We remember the crash, the pain, the fire. We remember you standing over our graves, swearing to bring us back." Jonathan staggered back, his mind reeling. How? How is this possible? Emily stepped closer, her expression hardening. "You brought us back, but you didn't bring us peace. We're not just your family, Jonathan. We're something else, something you can't control." Chapter 6. The Descent. Jonathan's world began to unravel. The house felt like a prison, the walls closing in on him. He could no longer tell if his family's behavior was a figment of his guilt-ridden imagination or something far more sinister. The children seemed to be aware of his thoughts, their actions growing increasingly malevolent. One evening, he found Michael in his study, rifling through his notes. "What are you doing?" Jonathan demanded. Michael looked up, his eyes cold and calculating. "We're learning, Father. Learning how to fix what you did." Jonathan's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" Michael's lips curled into a chilling smile. "You brought us back, but you didn't think about the consequences. We're not natural. We're not meant to be here." Panic surged through Jonathan. "I did it for love. I did it to bring you back." Michael's expression hardened. "Love? Or was it arrogance? You wanted to play God, and now you're paying the price." Jonathan's heart pounded as he backed out of the room. He needed help, needed someone to believe him. But who could he turn to? Who would understand the horror he had unleashed? Chapter 7. The Confrontation. Jonathan decided to seek help from his colleague, Dr. Amanda Hayes, the one person he trusted. He invited her to his home under the pretense of needing assistance with his research. Amanda arrived, her concern evident in her eyes. "Jonathan, you look terrible. What's going on?" she asked as she stepped into the house. He led her to his study, locking the door behind them. "Amanda, I did something terrible." He explained everything: his family's death, the cloning, the changes he'd noticed. Amanda listened, her face growing pale. "Jonathan, this is dangerous. Cloning humans is one thing, but if they've retained memories from their past lives..." "They have," Jonathan interrupted, his voice trembling. "And they're becoming something else, something dark." Amanda shook her head. "We need to shut this down, Jonathan. This isn't natural. We don't know what they are capable of." As they spoke, a chilling scream echoed through the house. Jonathan and Amanda rushed to the source, finding Sarah standing over Michael, who lay motionless on the floor. Emily was nowhere to be seen. "What happened?" Jonathan cried, his heart racing. Sarah looked up, her eyes empty. "Michael wanted to leave. He said we should go back to the darkness. Amanda checked Michael's pulse, her face grim. He's gone, Jonathan. Desperation and fear clawed at Jonathan. We need to stop them. We need to end this. Amanda nodded, her expression resolute. Let's go to the lab. We need to figure out a way to undo this. Chapter 8. The Lab. Jonathan and Amanda worked feverishly in the lab, searching for a solution. They knew they had to act quickly. The clones were growing more unstable by the hour. Jonathan's hands shook as he prepared the necessary equipment, his mind racing with fear and regret. We need to isolate their DNA and destabilize it, Amanda said, her voice steady despite the chaos. If we can break down their genetic structure, it might undo the cloning process. Jonathan nodded, his eyes haunted. I never wanted this. I just wanted my family back. Amanda placed a hand on his shoulder. I know, Jonathan, but sometimes the dead should stay dead. As they worked, the air in the lab grew colder, the lights flickering ominously. Jonathan's breath came in short gasps as he felt a presence behind him. He turned to see Emily standing in the doorway, her eyes filled with a chilling rage. You can't undo this, Jonathan, she hissed. You brought us back, and now you have to live with the consequences. Amanda stepped forward, holding a syringe filled with the destabilizing agent. Stay back, Emily. This has to end. Emily's eyes narrowed, and with a swift motion, she lunged at Amanda. The syringe clattered to the floor as they struggled. Jonathan grabbed another syringe, his hands trembling as he approached them. Emily, please, he pleaded. Don't make me do this. Emily's expression softened for a moment, her eyes flickering with the love he once knew. Jonathan, let us go. Let us find peace. With a heavy heart, Jonathan injected the syringe into Emily's arm. She gasped, her body convulsing as the destabilizing agent took effect. Amanda pushed her away, and Emily crumpled to the floor, her form slowly disintegrating. Chapter 9. The Aftermath. The house fell silent, the oppressive darkness lifting. Jonathan and Amanda stood over the remains of Emily, their faces etched with sorrow and relief. They knew their ordeal was far from over. Sarah was still out there, and they had to find her before it was too late. They searched the house, their footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Jonathan's heart ached with every room they passed, memories of his once happy family flooding his mind. Finally, they found Sarah in the attic, her small form huddled in a corner. Daddy, don't let me go back, she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. Jonathan's heart broke as he knelt beside her. Sarah, I have to. You don't belong here. Tears streamed down her face as she clung to him. Please, Daddy. I don't want to go back to the darkness. Jonathan's resolve wavered, but Amanda's firm hand on his shoulder reminded him of what had to be done. He injected Sarah with the destabilizing agent, holding her close as her body began to dissolve. I love you, Sarah, he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. As Sarah's form disintegrated, a sense of peace washed over Jonathan. The house grew silent once more, the oppressive presence lifting. Jonathan and Amanda stood in the attic, their faces pale and drawn. Chapter 10. Moving Forward. The days that followed were a blur of grief and relief. Jonathan couldn't bear to stay in the house that had once been filled with so much love, and now so much horror. He sold it, taking only a few mementos with him, and moved to a small apartment near the university where he worked. Amanda stayed by his side, helping him through the darkest moments. She was a constant source of strength, guiding him as he tried to rebuild his shattered life. Together, they faced the fallout of his actions, dealing with the legal and ethical ramifications of his experiments. Jonathan knew he could never escape the guilt of what he had done, but he was determined to make amends. He dedicated his research to understanding the complexities of cloning, vowing to never repeat his mistakes. He became an advocate for ethical practices in genetic research, hoping to prevent others from falling into the same trap he had. As the years passed, Jonathan found a measure of peace. The memories of his family still haunted him, but they no longer held the same power over him. He had faced his demons and emerged stronger, if not unscathed. And in the quiet moments, he could almost feel Emily's presence, a gentle reminder of the love that had driven him to such desperate lengths. He knew he could never truly bring them back, but he could honor their memory by living a life that they would be proud of. And in that, he found a measure of redemption. Epilogue: The Legacy. Years later, Jonathan stood in front of a packed auditorium, preparing to give a lecture on the ethical implications of cloning. His hair had turned gray, and his face was lined with the passage of time, but his eyes still held a spark of determination. He looked out at the audience, filled with young scientists eager to push the boundaries of knowledge. "Today, I want to share a story with you," he began, his voice steady. "A story of love, loss, and the consequences of playing God." As he spoke, he saw Amanda in the front row, her supportive smile giving him strength. He told them about his family, about the accident, and the desperate lengths he had gone to in an attempt to bring them back. He spoke of the horror he had unleashed and the lessons he had learned. In the end, he concluded, "We must remember that science is a powerful tool, but it must be wielded with caution and respect. We must never forget the ethical implications of our actions and the potential consequences of tampering with nature." The audience was silent, hanging on his every word. Jonathan took a deep breath, feeling a sense of closure wash over him. He had made his peace with the past, and now he could look to the future with hope. As the applause filled the room, Jonathan knew that his family's legacy would live on not in the cloned replicas he had created, but in the lessons he had learned and the lives he had touched. And in that, he found a measure of redemption, why beings who had been born from his own research, from his own dreams of what could be. They were his children, in a way, and he would do everything in his power to ensure that they had a future, no matter how uncertain it might be.